Okay, thank you for coming along and welcome to the October version of the Retrofit Forum. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm already thinking it's November. Such a nice day outside. We've got a great session today on post-occupancy evaluation with Candido from MSD, University of Melbourne, and Liam Wallis from HIP versus Hype. The same forum, we have a couple of talks, hopefully some generous discussion time. We'll catch up a little bit about what's happening around the traps in retrofit on the way through. Just like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong people. I'd like these proceedings to take place in the spirit of reconciliation and looking after our land and in fact the wider planet and do some good sustainable design practices on the way through. I think that's all I really need to say, other than to hand over to Chris Candido, who is going to tell us about some work she's done around post-occupancy evaluation. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much for the invite. It's great to collaborate across different research units in the faculty. I really admire and support the work that the Retrofit Lab is leading. My name is Chris Candido. Part of have a big collaboration bit of the Retrofit Lab, but I also lead my own shop, the Sustainable In-House Environments Lab, SHE for short. I'm part of the Global Research Advisory by the International Wellbeing Institute and recently appointed for the Global Commission Healthy Indoor Air. Post-occupancy evaluation is part of that idea. We hear a lot of that in industry. What gets measured, what can be measured, can be managed. So what post-occupancy evaluation does is basically to elevate the voice of building occupants across different building typologies. So we want to understand and use their perceptions and experience to bridge the gap between design and performance of spaces, because sometimes you have an intended design, but you're not quite sure after the building and the space is built if it's actually meeting that intended design intention. So post-occupancy evaluation surveys are not new. I have been doing this type of work in Australia for 10 years now, but I think the older ones will be probably 30, 40 years old or something like that. The advantage of having post-occupancy evaluation surveys that are actually consolidated, benchmarkable tools that have been around for a while is they streamline the process, they're relatively easy to understand. It adds credibility to your project. So it's a third-party assessment of what is happening in that particular building. We have, I think, not just myself in leading post-occupancy evaluation surveys, but other POE survey providers want to make an impact, which is actually use the data to prompt change. They are very cheap. POE surveys in Australia, active in Australia, they cost about $3,000 per project. That's regardless of the project size, the number of building occupants and complexities. And they also want a constant improvement. Every 3 or 5 years or so, you're going to revisit to see if the questions that you're asking are still relevant. I think post-COVID, there are questions that were not asked. Post-COVID, there are questions that you must ask. So the University of Melbourne on SHE survey, these are the topics that we try to cover. So surveys usually have just an indoor environmental quality centered approach. That's where most of the survey providers around there will have questions. But we try to take a different approach because I actually think that the other modules that we have and all of these questions that are relevant to space, people, place, and tools, they actually add a lot more to the story of that space, to the experience that people are having. They're just asking boring questions about thermal comfort. Sorry, people, I just had to say it. We're just about 3 years old, but we very much have a global prominence or impact. These are all these dots are countries where the survey have been used, different buildings. And the reason why we had this international uptake in such short period of time is because the SHE survey is the only Australian-based survey that has been endorsed for use for WELL V2, GBCA Green Star, and also Neighbours Indoor Environment. So by holding the triple crown of certification, it means that the buildings or people come to us I don't have to go knocking on people's doors to actually use the survey. From an academic perspective, that is such a great privilege to have, because if any of you has ever tried to get any surveys done, right, Dosa, you know how hard it is for people to engage with that. So some of the ways that surveys traditionally are used is, before and after case studies. This is just one that we finished recently, a project funded by Sumitomo, and we were interested in comparing interventions by introducing timber and nature or biophilic design features into a controlled environment and see what would happen in terms of, before and after. So we could map by using the survey. You can see all the numbers, they look really good. 9% increase in terms of overall satisfaction, 117% increase in satisfaction with acoustics, 20% in lighting, air, temperature, 25%. So these are very straightforward before and after. Very popular also for Green Star certification, which has additional points given to people if they do a before and after study comparison. So very pronounced and very prevalent within the Australian corporate market. But one thing that we spend a lot of time doing is also combining the survey data with additional data points. So another point of difference is trying to, yes, everyone loves to talk about perceived productivity. So we have that as a question. It's one of the core questions, but by also knowing, for example, that the spaces are certified, we can do comparisons between spaces that are not certified, well certified, and actually start promoting new research agendas that didn't exist before. So this paper that I have, the bar graph there, was actually the first in the world to report data from well-certified workplaces globally. No one else did that until we managed to do that. And then try to actually prove that by adopting the certification, there were pretty significant outcomes that were coming from people's perceived productivity, health, and well-being in general. But recently we went a step further, and by combining that survey data with hard utilization data, in one of our buildings on campus, actually, that is well certified, we also managed to demonstrate that spaces that are certified and have biophilic design principles implemented, they had 25% uplift in terms of utilization in that workplace. And people sought the spaces with the natural finishes 3 times more often and stayed there 5 times longer than any other space. So building owners love that type of evidence, because if they're deciding to do any sort of refresh in office fit outs, they actually need to know what they're going to be spending the money on. POE data becomes very, very interesting when we move away from one-off building by building comparison to actually doing a database level comparison, because you can start benchmarking. Property industry loves that, because it's like, I'm better than my, they are the landlord, or they are the tenant, or they are the whoever they want outside. But also with stories around, very commonly recently, we are the very first in Australia to have a score in acoustic comfort. Mind you, these are all open plan offices, so acoustics suck, right? That actually breached the 3-point mark. So it means that out of a 7.7 being the maximum score that anyone can ever get, they got a 3.7, that was reason for celebration, because the average benchmark is only 2.8. So being able to say we outperform in specific points, it gives people leverage of data from a competitive edge perspective. But by doing that over time, which is the other graph there, we've been able to demonstrate changes, right? And that one is particularly interesting because you can see on the blue line that acoustic comfort post-COVID has really taken a hit. And I would speculate that this is our tolerance to acoustic going down, but our expectations being on the rise, because we know better now, because we have our own bespoke office setups, and we know now that we don't have to have that sort of exposure in a shared office. But also very interesting to see results from indoor air quality going on up and it has to do with a lot of the efforts that were put by many building owners, our university included, in actually making the invisible visible, right? Indoor air quality became a priority, and it was managed much, much better than ever before. So I'm not surprised seeing that going up. With all the sensors being removed, unfortunately, and all the filters going away, I would predict 5 years from now for those results be going down, but that is just how it is. All of these data, of course, we can also start celebrating case studies that have to deal with, not only, I think the fact that we have out of the top 10 buildings in our database, 3 actually being adaptive reuse, but also went through a massive HVAC retrofit, dispels the notion that you can only do well if it is a new build. So out of the 3 buildings that I mentioned, 2 are heritage buildings. And they really invested a lot of time to make sure that those spaces were delivering on what they promised back to building occupants, because the buildings matter a great deal to those people as well. So there was that story of love and care around the relationship with the building. We're about to start another one that is actually here in Melbourne, and I'm actually looking forward to that. So our adaptive reuse and retrofitted buildings, which we have out of the top 10 buildings, I have 3, as I said. They do really well, as the data show that. And they do really well in things that are quite curious to me. So for example, visual comfort, natural light, I'm not surprised because they put a lot of effort in the way that the facade was being designed and how they changed. Particularly pleased, I think all the building owners were in terms of the indoor air quality and thermal comfort achievements. But I think in terms of interior design perspective, there was a really big surprise because people didn't want to move in that space because all of these spaces they implemented desk sharing. So it was an activity-based working environment, but people were still satisfied with this space. That was quite surprising. So POE can be used in many different ways. One thing that over the last 10 years I learned, it can be quite useful in your decision-making process. So by using as a diagnostic at different stage, different point times, you can actually leverage that information to make decisions. So these are just 5 projects I spotlighted that the end user data or the post-occupancy evaluation data has been used. These are real buildings in Australia. So it has been used to recalibrate space needs by responding to ways of working, design and experience of spaces, fine-tuning HVAC needs with a very sustainability-oriented kind of lenses through curbing operational carbon, bridging the gap between performance and design of spaces from an indoor environmental quality perspective, and even actually making decisions around office location. This was actually a portfolio level POE that we did. We had about 100 offices, and one of the questions, the most important question back to them was how satisfied people were with the building location, but also with commute times. So they used that to inform the next location of the entire portfolio, which is kind of interesting. So in short, POEs can be used as, very successfully these 4 different ways that I've seen over the years. From a diagnostic perspective, can be quite useful to understand what is happening now, but also over time. Before and after interventions are very popular and very peculiar to the Australian market. I don't see that elsewhere around the world. It provides a really good baseline to work with, but also provides an opportunity for you to test the interventions, if they worked or did not. Benchmarking provides a point of comparison. So the better than, the next person or the next building is quite important from a competitive edge perspective. And when you start combining with all the data points, then it provides kind of bigger picture evidence for a broad range of decisions that is not just about people and people productivity, but also other types of decision-making that you have to make on these spaces and the layouts of those spaces. That's it from me. I think I'm on time.
Well done, Christhina. Breaking from tradition and actually finishing on time. There's lots of really good stuff in there. I have some questions, but I think we'll hold questions until we've had both speakers speak, so we can look at some of the overlaps together. So next we have Liam Wallis, the founders of Fit versus Hype. Really good reputation in the industry around sustainability, and Liam's going to take us through some industry work case studies, I believe. Liam, over to you.
Cool, I've just got to quit the meeting and rejoin because it's
Yep,
not
sure.
allowing me to share. So technology in 2025. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today, and I guess the benchmarking approach is absolutely awesome and so useful at scale. And I'd love to chat more. It's like the best thing about these sessions is expanding your frame of reference and accessing kind of what's out there. It's one of the biggest challenges in sustainability. So for us, acknowledgement of country, we've been through that. My presentation today, I'll take you a little bit through our experience as a developer and sustainability consultant, some of the projects that we're delivering, the post-occupancy research that we're undertaking, some interesting findings in the commissioning space, which we think is particularly interesting in this kind of middle band of asset classes, I guess you call it. You know, the expensive kind of tier one assets get all the resources thrown at them, and there's just a huge number of buildings out there that do not. And what we've found is they're not operating as designed. And then how we're looking to apply the findings. So it's our team, Motley Crew. One of our big beliefs as a business is multidisciplinary expertise. So we have developers, lawyers, accountants, sustainability specialists, engineers, architects, you name it, passive house certifiers. It's really an eclectic mix of a team that's coming together to seek to influence better outcomes in our city. But our model is one of being a developer ourselves, having studied architecture, jumped across dark arts, to seek to go client side and really seek to enable better outcomes. And what we've found is if you're asking someone to do something differently, there isn't a better way to do it than providing an evidence of having done it yourself and with your own money. And so what we do with our developments is seek to deliver the sorts of outcomes that we think we should be seeing across our city. And then with our sustainability consultancy, we share those learnings as far and wide as we possibly can. And the sustainability consultancy is made up of better business, mandatory disclosure, climate risk, that sort of stuff, better buildings, ESD function with a special focus on passive house, and better cities and regions, which is that intersection between sustainability and policy. A couple of our projects over the years, a couple of townhouses in Brunswick. This is a 45-minute presentation that I'll condense into 15, so I won't talk too much about these. Some townhouses in Abbotsford. We helped to set up the financial model that exists behind Nightingale. That for me was really, having studied architecture, going across to private development, really putting that learning to the test in helping to set up the investment structure. And the procurement model for the first two Nightingale projects. We were investors in both of those projects. This is Nightingale 2 in Fairfield, still to date the most difficult project I've delivered on a railway line, but pertinent given some of the kind of ambitions for our city at the moment. This is a small sort of bower group and model that we tested, 3 townhouses in Brunswick. We had the Premier here a couple of weeks ago announcing a new policy, which was kind of cool. And we lived in this project, and that front fence got plenty of use during COVID. Sort of an interesting idea here, we actually set up a shared ownership structure over that front yard. Typically, your front townhouse is always worth more than the rear two due to its frontage. So we set up a shared ownership model for each of the 3 townhouses over that front yard. And it's a space that we really enjoyed using as a collective. This 5 years later, we shot it recently. A really important idea for us is this idea of architecture of future heritage value. So when you're designing and building a building, what are the decisions that you can make that could enable that building to be loved and want to be protected by a community in the future? It influences what materials you use. It influences how you detail those materials, how you can expect a building to perform over time. Landscape obviously plays a huge part. Ruskin Elwood down the canal in Elwood, 5 years later, again, buildings that age gracefully and become part of their community. I think developers don't think enough about these sorts of ideas. HVH Hotel in our project, which I'll talk today about, but there's a hotel set up within this apartment, Fraser York in South Melbourne, by the market down there. Really, this is to give people a lived experience of what 8+ star living feels like. You know, in sustainability, we get caught a lot talking about performance metrics that are intangible to ourselves, let alone, you know, mainstream consumers. And we really wanted to give people an experience of what living in quite a busy location can be like. So when we're building to 8+ star, we're getting fabulous acoustic protection from the environment around us. We're getting, you know, consistent temperatures no matter the season, and with very little active heating and cooling, and all of the benefits that we talk to that we don't actually experience. And one of our focuses for this space is to get as many conservative-minded people in here as possible. And so we've had all sorts of ministers from both sides come into this space, bankers, lawyers, you know, the types that are usually quite skeptical of the benefits of sustainability. And, you know, when we bring them inside and we close that door and I lock it, it's a light bulb moment. You know, it's a great experience. Tangibly, it is quiet. And for anyone that's been in sort of a passive house level home, you get that feeling of fresh air due to the HRV. So this is the rooftop at Fraser York, nice community space. You get a hard time putting a fireplace in a sustainable building, but, you know, sustainability is more than just carbon. And that fireplace is the heart of the building, and residents use it regularly and they connect within that space all throughout the year. I think that's also really important to note. And sustainability, I've sort of been through that, but postdoc research. So our model is one of, we design, we build, we finish, we live in, and we want to know whether our design's performing as per our assumptions. And with an in-house team, we have an ability to throw some resources at that. So some of the questions we ask are: systems design optimized for efficient, effective operation, and are systems commissioned properly? So we had a relatively small sample size in this project, 20 apartments. We tested 2 apartments. On our future project, which I'll get to, 61 apartments, and we would love to find a research partner to look more meaningfully at post-op performance. Here we go. So during construction, we had our teams on site. We were tracking all sorts of things around how builders were performing in accordance with the sorts of assumptions that are built into NAPers, you know, the small things like insulation installed around penetrations. Turns out guys just cut big squares. NAPers modelling assumes that it's cut tight. Got plenty of photos of it not being the case. I wonder how many buildings around town are built that way. Yeah. So those sorts of things. We did a blower door test to set a baseline. We didn't try to achieve high levels of air tightness on this project and found some interesting results. Then we did about 12 months, so we got 4 seasons worth of postdoc data and spent too long analysing the data. But anyway, quite a few data points. And this is the apartment that I'll talk to. This is the apartment I lived in for the last 3 years. I've just recently moved out. It's my little family, Katia, our 2 boys, Masi and Elio. It was 185 square metre, 3-bedder, built to 8.1 star NatHERS with a heat recovery ventilation system installed. We, knowing what we know, having tested the performance of Nightingale 2, will not build an apartment to current code without HRV installed. What we know is that the air tightness of current code compliant apartments is significantly lower than 5 air changes per hour. So like we're looking at needing active heating and cooling, active mechanical ventilation in apartments that are code compliant, let alone built to the level that we're achieving. Blower door test, this big fun day. concrete box, fire standards have improved, all panos are being inspected now. You know, in window installation regimes have improved in accordance with minimum compliance requirements. This apartment, without trying, achieved 2.33. It's really interesting. We've got a massive problem with the disconnect between what we're actually building and what our mechanical design assumptions are assuming in terms of system design. So yeah, buildings are growing all sorts of fun stuff at the moment. It's fair to assume. We put AWARE sensors in. We weren't as rigorous as Pippa in choosing our device.
Done a few.
But we thought they were pretty good, and we put one in, and yeah, just testing key metrics, I guess, of IEQ. And like I said, we had about 6 sensors deployed in this one apartment and a 6 in another apartment through that 12-month period. What we learned, it's a pretty cool graph. So the solid band in the background is WHO comfort band. The dotted line, the green dotted line, is what Homes Victoria regard as their thermal comfort limit, which is high and kind of scary. And then you've got minimum and maximum daily outdoors, which are the bounds to this graph. And then we've got our apartment 401 temperature. So we were lucky enough to have some control periods. The apartment was unoccupied basically for a month through January. So we've got a really good control through the middle there. We've got 2 days creeping up towards consecutive days. We've got a bit of a heat wave, 37, 38 degrees. Apartments staying well below Homes Vic, peaking its head above WHO, but generally sitting within WHO thermal comfort band without any active heating and cooling, and zero management. So, you know, external blinds were down to the east, but no management, no flushing at all. It's pretty compelling. It's a small sample size, but pretty compelling. In winter, so around a couple of weeks, apartment was unoccupied there through the middle. What we see is a steady decrease in apartment temperature. Again, unoccupied, no active heating and cooling, steady decrease, stable state temperature sits just under 18 degrees. And then we came back and obviously heated the apartment up. Interestingly, there's no apartment above, and both apartments below were unoccupied, so we weren't enjoying the benefit of thermal transfer either.
Yeah, and does Homes Vic have a minimum thermal comfort?
Not that I'm aware of. They probably should. Yeah.
And we don't have an average Victorian to compare it.
It's scary. Yeah, I'd love to
imagine
know if someone's
off
got
the
it.
bottom of the chart on some of this.
Yeah, but some of the stats we hear that the average rental apartment, the overnight temperature is below 10 degrees internally.
Yeah.
And definitely HV's stock would be probably performing outside of that.
I work with people that deliberately don't put the heating on
Yeah.
because they can't afford to pay the bill.
This is part of like our little point.
Yeah.
Um,
That'd be interesting.
Shoulder season is where we get the best performance. This is really where apartments in the Melbourne climate are optimised with HRV. This is where you really get the benefit. So you're just not turning heating and cooling on at all. With the apartment closed, if you want to, you're living very, very comfortably with incredibly good IEQ performance. And having lived in this apartment for 3 years, just testament to the quality of life that you enjoy. So key learnings, built to a high standard, provide more consistent internal temperatures in summer and winter. No surprise to anyone here. Heat recovery ventilation significantly reduces requirements for heating and cooling in shoulder seasons, where you get the real kicker on performance. And the two combined lead to significant operational savings. Okay, and one of the things we're prosecuting out there is the reduced, I guess, intensity and function of the systems that you've installed would see those systems last longer and be maintained less. So there's a sort of an operational cost saving there as well as a maintenance replacement sort of life cycle cost saving. We ran some quick numbers, and some of our clients built to rent operators, or Homes Victoria, or Homes New South Wales, or some of the community housing providers with significant portfolios. Just looking at the sorts of scale of portfolios and what the energy cost savings could be over a 10-year period. So just trying to prosecute some commercial arguments out to market. Looking at a very conservative $7 million saving on an apartment built to 8-star versus minimum code compliance. Pretty considerable savings that could be reallocated to better uses. Significantly improved health and wellbeing outcomes. So sort of the IEQ data we're getting is, we haven't brought it into this presentation, but humidity levels really strong, particulate levels, HRV playing a really effective role in removing particulates after cooking. We had a sensor in one of our child's room, and you get a spike when you change a nappy. They're that good.
That's a good one. It's a number of issues are changing.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. So all sorts of stuff you scrape out of this, which is valuable, and I guess stories and narratives to build into how we engage with clients. So averages for CO2 below best practice 800 parts per million. Higher recordings in winter, interestingly, higher occupancy. This is one of the areas that we've sought to optimise in our future design. Is we weren't quite happy with the performance of the HRV system based on the results we're getting back. Volatile organics, again, staying sort of within, that's the child nappy example, and really just good results all around. So commissioning some over time, but this is our hot water system, so electric heat pump system from Stiebel. This graph shows how the system was performing at handover, and we sort of cottoned onto the energy use. Just the team spent about 3 months tracking a number of systems and really narrowed in on the hot water system, using about 40% less than it should be. Learn a couple of things here. So design and construction process, services engineers had designed, builder had built, plumber had installed, supplier had verified commissioning. Nobody had actually done a performance test on the system. And again, at an asset of this scale, 20 apartments, you don't have the resources to necessarily come and test things to make sure everything is operating effectively. We set about, we got everyone to site, all the relevant parties. You can imagine fingers pointing, you're responsible, you're responsible, you're responsible, you're responsible. Luckily, our sustainability team weren't novated. They sat under us as client, under the contractual procurement, relationships. We brought this data to the table, and Stiebel really took on responsibility and worked with us to solve the problem. Turns out that the problem was linked to a booster, an inline booster that was heating up the ring main. So the centralised hot water ring main was being kept at about a 70-degree temperature and had been operating at that temperature for 3 months. So that was one thing. That was a really quick switch to flick. We got a 30% saving. Stiebel then spent 18 months post that time further optimising the system for the Melbourne climate to feed that data into their data set. They didn't have a data set for the Melbourne climate. And that's really resulted in, Stiebel as a business having a unique understanding of the operational profile of a building of this scale in the Melbourne climate that they can use to further optimise their systems. So I'll skip through this because I need to get to the end of my talk, but application for us. So the 2 key areas that we've focused on, this is our next project, Parklife 2 in Brunswick. Austin Maynard Architects have designed it. Our team led a detailed performance briefing exercise based on the data set we'd gathered from Fries and York. set performance parameters for the services engineering design. We focused in on HRV design and hot water design. And I think, why is this important? Why is it relevant? Because nowhere near enough, I guess, built environment professionals, particularly in the commercial market, spend enough time on seeking to optimize their design, procurement, delivery, learning to iteratively improve upon the products that they're delivering. And we're seeking to do that actively, I guess, as a business that's interested in driving the industry forward. So one thing we have incorporated into this project, it's really cool when you get into the detail. So we've got a BMS installed designed into this project. And we've built it into the contractual relationships in the contract of sale. So we've kind of gone to the extent of thinking about, well, that data will exist. We want to be able to access it. So we want to notify people buying that we'll be accessing that data. It will be de-identified and will be used for research purposes. But again, it's you've got to think sort of at that level, I guess, to be able to move forward at scale. So if someone wants to partner on a meaningful sample size for this project, let's do it.
Okay. Okay, that was great. Thank you very much. Maybe we can put our hands together for Christhina. Really interesting stuff there. I'm a structural engineer and I'm just amazed at all of this stuff every time we start to talk about. Are there questions around the table people want to ask?
Just a little.
Yep. Don't just hit your red button to green. Yeah. Thanks.
Probably for Liam, although I really enjoyed your talk too, thank you. On thermal bridges with windows particularly, I regret not doing thermally broken windows on my redevelopment 12 years ago, and it's definitely even though I've got light coloured metal windows, it's the weak point in terms of as a developer, are thermally broken windows more sort of standard and affordable now, or is there still a big uplift for doing the thermally broken windows?
Depends what builder you go to.
Right.
So this is the other thing that you learn. We've just recently run a tender process on this project, and two of the builders, it's remarkable to see this in real time. Two of the builders have established relationships with window suppliers that can supply thermally broken windows competitively, and two of them don't. And the difference is about 30%. And it just tells you, like, number one, tender, because you find stuff like that out. And number two, capacity building in this industry is so important. The reason that the two builders that do have that IP in relation to better quality performing windows at a lower price, they have it because they've built two Nightingale projects and another high performing project. So it's these projects that are seeking to push the industry forward, these case studies, these exemplars that build capacity in the system to enable us to access global markets. Because that's the thing, like, this stuff's being built at volume, at scale for global markets. We're just a tiny portion of that global market.
And do you think there'll come a time when it actually gets built into our regulatory code? I'm from Norway, where it's illegal to have thermal bridging. It's part of the construction code. You're just not allowed to do it. Do you think that'll happen in Australia at some stage with this capacity building?
Not if we keep installing NCC,
Just on that, because I liked your story about the really rough penetration that's supposed to be or assumed to be sealed and is not sealed. And that quite often comes up is, the capacity of the industry to actually deliver on things like passive house and just generally good sustainable construction. Do you have many dots on the graph to actually see whether that's improving or not? Are you getting better tradies on site now who are happy to have those conversations and deliver to that?
No.
No.
Like, in all honesty, like at single residential scale, there's some just really awesome examples of builders, particularly in Melbourne. Seems to be something going on in Melbourne that are really focused. So Sustainable Builders Alliance, if people don't know about it, definitely check it out. It's a group of tradies that are builders predominantly that are clubbing together and supporting each other in building high performance capacity in the industry. And that's, you know, about educating young tradies who are really interested in doing better and getting around each other, and plumbers and electricians and everybody inside that ecosystem. But, you know, to give you an example, HRV installation, even for a 60 apartment project, is problematic. To find a trade who's willing to take on that risk and not charge you an absolute fortune for something that they shouldn't be charging an absolute fortune for. It's essentially a HRV system inside an apartment is a very, very simple residential context, a very, very simple installation. But yeah, there's a bit of a monopoly over the market for people that can do it at that scale at the moment. So the pricing does not reflect the effort, unfortunately. But again, more capacity, more we do this, that would be one regulatory lever that we could pull that would make a really big difference really quickly, is to mandate the installation of mechanical ventilation for residential dwellings in multi-res. Would be like an overnight game changer.
It would be, but I'll just say I was at the Pathways to Cleaner Air conference last week, and the general theme was we don't need to worry about air quality in residential buildings. We need to focus on public buildings. And I mean, we're the absolute opposite. We're presenting the data about we're collecting in 400 bedrooms of carbon dioxide above 2,000 parts per million for, you know, 6 hours while people are sleeping. But it was like it's a hard sell at the moment.
Yeah.
What was driving that, Pippa? Cost? What was driving that?
Perhaps it was also the focus on the particular audience around cleaner air to reduce disease transmission. So public buildings, you know, we focus on more air exchange. So, you know, if you've got influenza, I'm not going to get it because the air's going to clean it. Whereas in residential, you know, we can't regulate it in terms of mandate air quality. But there's, to me, the big division was around, why do we need air quality cleaner in apartments? Well, because we come home, we rest, we rejuvenate, we get ready for the next day. We're dealing with stresses, depression, mental health. So although I'm sleeping in a bedroom without enough ventilation, means if my partner's got influenza, I'm probably going to get it anyway because we're in the same bed. But it's taking away from the quality of sleep that I'm having. So I think what I'm saying is there's all these competing priorities.
I think health's one side of it, and then there's building fabric health, you know, and it's sort of like, that's just sort of the point we were trying to make. Just a co-compliant construction, apartments are incredibly airtight, and mechanical design assumptions assume that people open windows when they cook, which they don't. And, you know, in these bedrooms, the amount of moisture build-up you're getting in walls is huge, and stuff's growing for sure. And so, you know, the energy recovery ventilation system, just a mechanical ventilation solution would start to reduce that impact and deliver health benefits.
I did just want to add one.
And energy benefits.
Well, question about the documented improvements in things like construction quality. At CSIRO, my colleague Michael Ambrose does a blower door test every couple of years, where he collects up a sample of sort of 400 houses and, you know, sees whether or not over time there's an improvement. And he CSIRO puts out reports every year, and it has shown an improvement, but it's also flagged it's a mix of class 1 and class 2, and the apartments being really, really super airtight, and then the housing improved over time. So that implies there's a level of awareness that
starting to grow.
It's starting to grow.
We have seen the relationship between water risk. So insurers are really cracking down on builders' water-related insurance coverage, and so that's driving more kind of procurement focus from builders to make sure that they're waterproofing buildings properly. And so again, there's a couple of like incidental outcomes going on that aren't necessarily quality focused, but are in response to fire regulation and a tightening down from insurers on water related claims that
Is
are
that more
driving.
intense rainfall driving it, do you think?
I just, some of the outcomes and costs building up, potentially more intense water events. But we're seeing, so just in my career, this is totally anecdotal, but quite a cavalier attitude towards waterproofing active roof decks 10 years ago. To builders now will not think twice about using a fully certified system. Just won't even contemplate the alternative.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed just in discussions with people, all of that language is starting to make its way into lay people, which is a really good sign, I think, because people, one of their first questions is, can I afford to do passive house on my house, which is good. And you see builders branding themselves as passive house builders as well. So more and more of those signs is a good thing.
I'm certifying 150 passive houses around Australia at the moment. It's pretty cool. There's definitely a really interesting movement.
Yeah, and even we've had passive house presentations, even if it's not full passive house, just the understanding of what's important and what's not.
If we're certifying 150, it's like
exactly
what
right.
number of higher performance houses are actually out there. Yeah, it's heading in the right direction.
Just on performance, I wanted to ask you a question, Christhina, just on your 15%, and I'm really interested in the productivity, which my background is more commercial, I guess, but just trying to link increases in productivity and before and after surveys back through to increases in staff productivity, reducing absenteeism and all of that sort of thing. Are those metrics a part of your $3,000 survey for each project, or are those figures you quoted more general figures?
It's one of the core questions we have. We ask question, self-report, this is related to the standard core question that has always been there. And most surveys we have a similar question because that's the question that we hate the most, but it's the question that everyone likes to talk about.
Yeah. Why is it the question you hate the most?
Because I can't really demonstrate for sure that is causality. So I'm happy to use as an indicator, and of course it's relevant for success stories. But there are so many other questions that I find more interesting personally, like from my own research perspective. But of course I can never remove that question, otherwise they would never use the survey.
And can I ask, do people do your surveys because they need to under the WELL scheme, or do people actually want to know these things just for their own benefit and to report to their boards and CEOs and staff? And
it's a mixed bag. So I'll say 6 out of 10 surveys we do, it will be driven by certification requirements. And mind you, I think about 40% of the surveys are now done by the same organization every year. So we have now historical data because they have to meet that requirement, especially for WELL certification. So it creates opportunities to go back with the same organization, but 5 years ago, where they were in the database and over time. The other 4 out of 10, they do it because they're interested in. So these are particularly popular with big 4 banks, financial institutions. These are the ones that are coming to us and doing the survey for their own internal purposes, and they have their own milestones to achieve in terms of staff productivity, health and well-being that sit outside the targets in terms of certification. So they may use for dual purposes, but not always the case. So it's quite interesting to see that shift over time. But I think our Big 4, they're quite committed to that. It costs them money. They realize that if they don't look after the staff well. So yeah, they keep using the survey and have been for years.
Are there other questions around the table? And I might just,
I've always got one.
I know you've always got one, Dan. I'll pass to you in a minute. I've got a couple of other ones here as well. Before we do that, I'll just quickly talk about what's going on around retrofit, just around the traps. I must admit there's not a huge amount on our list. But one of the important ones is, or one of the more interesting and important ones is the housing towers appeal. So there's the class action that you may or may not be aware of from the tenants through Inner Melbourne Community Legal, arguing that their human rights have been infringed upon after not being consulted prior to their eviction. That didn't get anywhere in the courts earlier this year, with the government arguing that the basis for the decision to knock down the towers, the reports that was made on, were subject to cabinet privilege and weren't to be made available to the public, which was pretty unfortunate. But in a Melbourne Community Legal, and the tenants have gone through the appeals process. So that actually started yesterday in the Court of Appeals, and went along for the morning session anyway, and it was incredibly interesting. So the tenants are arguing that the way that the government let out the information about these reports really coloured and prejudiced their opportunity to do cross-checking and looking at the credibility of those reports. So when they first started the case, the government was saying that there were no reports, and then when they had testimony from the CEO, there were vague mentions to these reports, and there was a report apparently from Cushman and Wakefield, who are property people, and Becker, who are the technical people. And again, they were vaguely referenced as being the basis for knocking down the 44 towers, but no detail was provided other than to list the list of failings in the towers, which are not really failings. They're more a shopping list of things that you would need to make right when you did a retrofit. So I'm not sure where that's ended up, but you know, keep an eye on the papers. I know the Age are covering it to see where it goes. I found it quite frustrating as an engineer, because it seemed to be more about legal process than it did about the rights and wrongs of what the right thing to do technically is. We've had 2 independent consultant teams now look at those buildings and say, yes, these can absolutely be retrofitted, and there's much better solutions that don't involve evicting tenants. So that's a shame. We'll see where it goes. This is the last retrofit forum for the year, unfortunately, because next month in November we have Rasmus Norgard, who is the Treasurer Fellow, coming to speak, and so we're going to concentrate on promoting that. He's the second Treasurer Fellow at MSD. So that fellowship enables artists, innovators, designers, you know, supports them in promoting design-based solutions and innovation to visit Melbourne. So that should be good. He's from Copenhagen. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. And so we have very strict rules on how we can actually send emails out to mailing lists, because we don't want to be spamming people. But can people on this mailing list, will they get something on that?
Yeah, if you sign up to the mailing list, we can distribute more information about that. But we'll also be pushing it through other marketing channels as well. So you should, hopefully, if you're in this room and your algorithm's listening.
I'm happy to share it. I've just signed up. I'm happy to share it.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, all right, so that's, anybody else got anything to contribute? Happy to open the table to it.
At the appeals the court, are they pushing to have those reports released?
Yeah.
Is that part of what they're trying to do?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
I think kudos to you, Brendon, for that. I know you kept that quite quiet in your presentation there, but you've been really instrumental in pushing. So credit to you for driving that forward.
There's quite a strong movement, and yeah, I must admit, maybe it's being around universities, but you start to question a lot of things I didn't used to question when I was in industry around the motivations of people in government and the people who are supposed to be looking after us as a society.
Yeah. Also, a lot of consultants working for government projects are probably being a bit quiet.
Yeah, well, it's one of the good things, the good roles of the university and the lab actually. So, Inner Melbourne Community Legal came to us and said, would we provide expert opinion? And I said no, because I generally don't like doing expert opinion work. It's quite stressful. And they couldn't get anybody to do it because Homes Victoria give out a lot of work to the consulting industry. And so nobody was willing to actually, you know.
And it's also a PI insurance thing as well.
Yeah,
potentially. So
yeah.
for people in infrastructure.
Well, yeah, expert opinion work can be actually really lucrative because you get good rates and that's, but you're right, there's a lot of issues with it. But so in the end, we ended up doing it and it sort of worked well, but that's the role of the university. It's to, you know, just put a factual basis out there. It's not to take one side or the other, but it's actually to be a resource for society and for, you know, classes of people who don't have access to that otherwise.
Exactly. There's a huge power imbalance there, and it's just, it's really extraordinary that the data still hasn't been released, or no meaningful reports have come from the government.
Exactly right.
And equally, Harriet Shing saying that nobody in the world is retrofitting these buildings, which is
so
that is straight out untrue.
Statements like that are at best ignorant, or
at
worst just barefaced lies.
Exactly.
And,
So anyway,
and it's hurting real people. There was a public meeting last Thursday arranged by Kate Shaw from Urban Geography here, and there was 450 people meeting at Capitol Theatre. People from right across the board talking about these housing commission towers and what's going on, and the questions and the discussions afterwards ranged from, you know, politicians through to consultants through to, you know, one lady who said, "You're all here talking. I haven't got a roof over my head tonight. I'm sleeping rough because I got evicted from my apartment. There's nowhere to go." Yeah. It's
one of the wealthiest countries.
It's that sort of thing. It's really confronting.
Yeah.
Those case studies, Dan, that you mentioned is such a good place to start.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Simon, the office, has pulled together a huge amount of that, and we helped do with that. You've helped with that, I've helped with that. Rory here as well. I mean, it would take you an hour to find equivalent projects globally. Exactly the same construction age, technologies and so on that have been and are being successfully retrofitted. So it's just, it's an ideological position. That's my worry slightly. We can make all the case studies, we have all the data, they just sort of bounce off at the moment. So we have to find another way of getting through.
Well, there's an argument to say that the government's happy to have the retrofit argument because they're real, they don't want to be in the business of providing public housing.
Yeah,
that's.
We're already
suspicious it's a cash grab.
So it's a privatisation move rather than.
We're the lowest in the OECD, and Victoria's the lowest in Australia. You can't go much lower on public housing provision. Anyway, looks like someone's trying to find out.
Look, we're over time, so please log off and head off if you need to. But if you want to stay on for 5 minutes because I will pass it down for your question that you're going to ask. Do you have a particular question?
It's fine. I mean, I think that conversation is much more important than my question.
Okay. Are there any other questions around the table? If not, thank you very much, Liam. Thank you, Christhina. Really interesting stuff and great to hear about. And please follow up with either Liam or Christhina if you have questions or research interests around post-occupancy. Thanks very much, and we will see you in the new year if we don't see you for Christmas Morgard in November. Thanks.